So I see we have Amanda up. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, I'm looking forward to your session. So let me introduce Amanda Wolff. She's the Chief Marketing Officer at OneSpace, which is one of our summit sponsors. So with 20 plus years of experience in marketing and sales, Amanda has built on her past e-commerce experience at OneSpace, where she helps brands win on the digital shelf. Her presentations, workshops, and ebooks educate e-commerce teams on best practices about optimizing content for visibility and conversion at scale. And that's what she's here to talk to us about today, the best practices for optimizing product content on multiple online grocery platforms. So Amanda, why don't you take over?
Thanks so much. I will do that. 1 second here. Share and go to, there we go. Okay, so thanks again for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's so strange to say here when I'm actually home. I'm used to being a road warrior that was traveling everywhere and presenting all over the place, and missing my trip to Chicago this year, as I'm sure many of you are, but also really grateful to be safe, and hope all of you are safe and sound where you're working as well. So again, I'm Amanda Wolff, Chief Marketing Officer at a company called OneSpace. We're a digital shelf optimization company, and we help brands optimize their content for search and conversion on multiple online retailers. And we do that through a combination of our software and our agency services. And so this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. It's something that we do all the time at OneSpace, and I think that there are some tips, hopefully, that you can get out of this. If you're a really seasoned e-com professional and you have a lot of experience developing content for the digital shelf, you know, some of this may be old hat, but hopefully I've got a few tricks in my bag that even some of you Jedis who are out there might be able to learn a few things today. So with that, you know, one of the things that I hear a lot, especially right now since COVID started, is we're crushing it. E-commerce is up 30%, some cases more, some cases less, but it's like everybody feels like they're winning right now in e-commerce in particular, if that's your role. And I guess my point with that is that everything is kind of all relative, right? We've seen the growth. We've seen what happens when the pandemic hit. So this is a time snap, of course, from April, but you know, it shows that rapid improvement in e-commerce sales. It was, I think, 2 to 3 years acceleration over the course of about you know, 90 days or less, 60 days or less for a lot of these different charts that you've been seeing. You're probably seeing a lot today and in other webinars that you've been to. McKinsey even said that in one of their reports that it was a 10-year acceleration in the period of 90 days. So a few variations of this basic graphic, but you get the gist. One of the groups that I've been following in terms of this, you'll see it a lot on Grocery Dive, is related to brick meets clicks, and then eventually this other variation of that where they were doing a scorecard and kind of keeping track of things. And so the most recent post from this, which was in September, was that online grocery is expected to leap 250 billion in 5 years. And that will account for 21.5% of total grocery sales. So I think the key thing here is the second bullet on the left here, which is that 43% of shoppers have used online grocery in the last 6 months, and that's compared to 24% 2 years ago. So, you know, we were, of course, all watching this in early April and May and in June and saying, when is this growth going to plateau? We are starting to see those plateaus, but I think the key thing here is that growth has not, you know, reverted back, and we're only going to continue to see that accelerate now, of course, over time. So back to that, you know, we're up 30%, yay us. Great growth is relative. So your brand could very well be up 30%, but it all comes down to share. And if your competitors are #1 in your category, they're probably up 40%. The challenger brands who have the ability to scrap and make changes really agilely, they could be up 60%. So do you know, I guess is the question that you should all be asking yourself, how you sit, not just related to your own e-commerce goals for the year, but how do you sit compared to share and your competitors? And I would challenge that since COVID, every brand can really be a challenger brand, and that includes the big guys, because there's so much disruption on the digital shelf. Digital shelf is so different than the physical shelf in that you have a set spot, and if you're out of stock or something happens like that on the physical shelf, your spot is still there. You're not going to be, missing out, right? When you get back in stock, you get back on that shelf. Well, it's not like that on the digital shelf for any of the retailers, and especially Amazon, where the algorithm is more sophisticated. You lose your spot on the digital shelf and your SEO ranking is damaged, and you have to build and claw that way back. So it really reset the game. If you weren't winning before, you can definitely be winning now. So I think that challenger brand mindset is one that everybody should be embracing, whether they're a small brand or a large one. So there's really 4 steps that I like to think of in terms of improving reach and agility, because reach and agility, like I mentioned on that previous slide, are really the things that you need to be able to do to be that challenger brand. You need to be able to act fast, and you need to be able to have broad reach into your markets and with your customers. So a few things that I like to recommend are to be always on in all the places. So a lot of you guys have a lot invested in paid, and you absolutely should, but are you investing as much in your product content for SEO and for conversion, just the content itself on the retailers besides Amazon? Because the customers are there. They're not just on Amazon, and they're not just looking at paid ads. 2 is expanding your portfolio. So, a lot of you may just sell, 20% of your portfolio online, or you only focus your energies on 20% of your portfolio. So how do you think about expanding your portfolio so that you're reaching all of those niche audiences and not just your top SKUs? Another is investing in content quality. So all of the retailers are asking and really begging for differentiated content. They're trying to set themselves apart. Walmart is trying to do different things from Amazon in terms of their content and their experience for their customers. What are you doing to make sure that you're meeting those expectations of the retailers, but that you're also meeting the opportunity that those differentiations provide you? And then be first to market, or at least be faster. So this is where those challenger brands, or the emerging brands in particular, really sometimes have a one-up on the big guys, because they can be more nimble. It's really easy to test and learn and to make small changes when you're just doing 5 products or 50 products. But when you've got a portfolio like 1,000 products or 1,600 or 2,000, that becomes a much bigger lift. And so understanding how to prioritize and how to invest your resources and your time so that you can be faster where it matters is one of the keys to really being able to improve your reach and agility. Now, a lot of you guys might be asking, like, okay, I just can't take on one more thing. How do you expect me to do 50% of my SKUs when I'm only doing 20% now? Or how can I tackle creating differentiated content for Instacart? I can barely get what I need for Walmart grocery app, right? And one way that I like to talk about this is thinking of it in the context of agile project management. So for those of you guys who are familiar with software development, Agile is a methodology that's used in a lot of organizations to help with speed in particular, but it's also to help just, help with that framework and be able to iterate quickly over time. So the primary levers that are available to you in Agile are scope, time, and resources. So scope allows you, it's the size of your project, right? In the case of what I'm talking about now, scope would be scale, right? Scope would be how many of your products are you covering in your portfolio? How many retailers are you looking at? How much work do you really want to bite off? Time, of course, is obvious, right? It's like, I can do this, sure, over 2 years, but by then all of that's outdated. The retailers have already changed. And then resources, that's about money. That's about your internal team. That's really about how many people you can put on this to get the work done. And then ultimately, these all pull and push together to create this boundary, and that's what impacts quality. So yes, you can always sacrifice quality, but of course that's not really what you want to do either, right? And that is something that a lot of us are doing when we only have, a pack shot up there, or maybe a bullet with, 2 words on it or something like that. That really is what I'm getting at when I talk about quality. And so in order for us to expand scope, which is really what we're talking about here, right? It's talking about how you go to more retailers with more of your products. In order to expand the scope without really sacrificing time and quality, because those are really kind of inflexibles that we don't necessarily want to play with, then really the only avenue that you have to look at is resourcing. That's a tough thing. And we know that that's hard anytime for any business, no matter how big or small you are. We all have limited resources. But I think the key thing to think about when you think about resources is that now is the time to strike if you're an e-com professional. Now is the time to say their organization is thinking about e-commerce, multiple teams in the organization are thinking about e-commerce. Now's my chance that I can use my own voice to lobby for additional resources to support me, whether those be internal staff or external freelancers or agency partners, but additional people, bodies to help you get this work done. So scope really equals scale, and scale is what you need to be able to drive growth and share. You can be winning, but if you're not capitalizing on the share and you're not beating the competition, then this is a key way that you can try to go after that. But it's hard, and I'm not trying to minimize that. I know that it's really hard, especially for big CPGs to scale. This is just a quick analogy. Thinking through, maybe you've got 300 new items, 1,500 annual updates. That's about 1,800 updates a year, conservatively, actually. And then you're looking at, syndicating that to 5 retailers that are your primary retailers. Maybe you have others, but these, let's just say you're picking 5 that you want to target. But when I say syndication, that's really a misnomer. And I'm going to talk through some tips around this in a little bit. But for those of you guys who are tied to this process, if you think that you can send your Amazon content as is everywhere, then you're probably hitting some roadblocks, because syndication as a concept means that you take one thing and you're able to blast it everywhere. But in reality, we know that every retailer is different. They have different requirements. They have different specifications. They have different title counts. They have different bullet counts. Now you could create the bare bones content that only works on the smallest denominator. For example, Target doesn't allow copy on their images. So maybe you just make the decision that all of my retailers, I'm not going to put copy on my carousel images. But if you're doing that, again, you're missing out on opportunity that could be helping you get share. And, of course, those numbers don't even really factor in the number of customers, the number of changes that are happening at the retailers themselves. Once you factor that in, that can be as many as 18,000 different pieces of content assets. We consider them really, even though it's creative content, it's really data. And it's different pieces of data that need to be deployed. So that's a lot. I mean, we understand that. And again, it doesn't even factor in the changes that are happening on the retailer side, and they're changing it all the time. We just saw some new fields emerge about a month ago on Amazon for some categories. Walmart's changing their title links. So, I mean, I'll be talking through some of these things in more detail, but we understand that. So there's a lot of factors that also complicate your ability to scale. You probably have a small workforce or a small team within the agency you've hired to work on your content. So your bandwidth and your pipeline for getting content out is probably pretty narrow. It's probably a pretty small circle. And you need to figure out a way to widen that. Another challenge that complicates things, though, is complex routing. So having a really strategic plan for how you handle routing is going to be one of the biggest accomplishments and biggest wins that you can ever have in your organization. You may have legal, you may have medical, you may have brand, all of whom want to look at your content. And I think that you can still enable that, but stakeholder collaboration about what they want to see versus what they need to see and is a really important conversation to have. The other really big complications around deployment hurdles. So anybody who's managed any of the major PIMs or DAMs understands that those systems are actually really complex despite how many of them are sold, right? It's like, in a lot of ways you hear it's an easy button, and I can promise you it's not. We have a very large team that manages, or I should say an expert team that manages this process, and for a lot of companies. And they're very busy. They're very busy managing this process because it's hard, especially when you have a lot of SKUs. But I promise you that if the content wasn't constrained by resourcing, you'll see lift. So this is a basic calculator. We use this internally, but I'm happy to share it. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn after the presentation, I can send this to you or send you the link for it to download it. It's just a little Excel sheet, but basically it just lets you put in some of your assumptions, like your conversion rate for your specific products, things like that. And then what it allows you to do is, once you plug in those norms and how much your content costs, and you can use your costs based on your agency or freelancers, that'll tell you if it's profitable for you to move forward with optimizing for a particular, product. So it just allows you to think, to get past the, is there going to be money in this? And instead to really focus on where there's the most demand and where there's the opportunity. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is creating a retailer strategy. Again, a lot of people may be focusing just on Amazon, or in the grocery space, maybe you're just focusing on Walmart. Hard not to focus on Instacart these days, I think with their particular, growth trajectory. But you may not have enough time or bandwidth to really worry about anybody else. But there are ways that you can tackle omni-channel expansion. And so here are some examples of some things that you can do in your organization to evangelize and to work through an omni-channel growth plan. One is to identify all your retail partners for e-commerce and work collaboratively with all your internal stakeholders to really learn from them and for them to learn from you. So that means having meetings with the retail partners as well as your internal partners to discuss whether or not it makes sense to make these investment changes with those particular retailers. Another is to determine your product portfolio strategy. So a lot of you guys have hero SKUs, you may have workhorses, you may have seasonal SKUs, niche SKUs. It's really important to do an analysis of those, not just taking those, maybe top 300 SKUs that are part of your company's roadmap, but really looking at the portfolio and understanding, is there a niche market that I could be really garnering a lot of sales in my backlog or my backlist of titles of products just by putting a little bit more investment into them. I'm not saying it has to be everything that you're doing for your hero SKUs. You're not going to do a huge paid media campaign for something that is a lower tier product. But if it can't sell online, where can it sell? And so I would encourage you guys to really go through this exercise, because a lot of brands that we talk to, once they get over this hurdle and start looking at it, actually make more money from the rest of their portfolio than from that top 20% that they were used to spending so much of their time on. Another piece of that is creating that differentiated content for the retailers. So this really comes down to your retailer content strategy. There are strategies that you can take to differentiate your content without having to rewrite all your content all over again for every single retailer. It just involves smart work collaborating with your creative teams to understand which aspects of the PDPs can be carried over from each retailer and which ones need that customization. And then building out that into your infrastructure so that every time your content is created, it's varied and it's modified for the different retailers. And then lastly, it's building that deployment and analytic plan. Not only does the creative need to be customized, but you also have to think about the different syndication processes. Even though syndication really doesn't exist as a word, a lot of us are still trying to do that. So understanding and collaborating with your PIM team is going to be one of the best things that you can do. If you don't have a PIM team and that's you, and you're responsible for syndicating with Salsify or with Syndigo, then understanding what those nuances are with the different retailers, and I'll give you a few tips on that in a little bit, especially for Instacart, can really help you in the long run get your content to market faster and in a smarter way. So we like to start with a retailer capability grid. This is actually a massive document that we track internally, but this is just a snapshot for you guys. It's probably already outdated because it changes almost every week. But we try to keep this information updated for our different customers because things are different. And so we modify our content that we're creating for different customers based on these criteria. So if we know, for example, that let's say Walmart has up to 4,000 characters, Amazon could be anywhere between 100 and 2,000 characters, depending on the category. We're going to make sure that we probably start with the longest description when we're first starting to write it, and then we can edit it down for all the other retailers. It's way easier and way more effective use of our resources if we're not trying to retrofit later for a longer description than what we're allowed. but also still taking advantage of the opportunity that having all that extra character count allows us. Okay, so let's get into some specific tips for each of the retailers. And hopefully this is maybe where some of you guys that are a little more advanced can try to get a few little kernels out of this presentation today. Okay, all right, so Instacart. Instacart leapt forward. You guys all have heard the stats about this. 57% share in April. They claimed more than half the online grocery market. Their sales grew by 98% between February and March. And they responded with a ton of innovation. So new features like fast and flexible and order ahead came into the platform itself. They added more shoppers, increasing investment in their service, better purchasing data, which is still coming for brands. They're just kind of trickling that out as they're able to build that out. And then that new self-service advertising platform, which is really powerful because it lets you bid on keywords, which is huge for Instacart. So first tip that I can give you for Instacart is you need to get in those baskets early. I mean, you may have heard this, but a lot of these sales, and this is from Instacart directly, are happening from the your items section of the site, so of the app. So if you don't get in that basket with that volume of new shoppers, then you're probably losing out to your competition. So it's really, really important, like the stat here, that by the customer's 10th order, 25% of their conversions are from what they've already purchased. Tip 2, Instacart discourages what we sometimes call mobile heroes, but really they're just hero images. And while they discourage those, they actually still allow them. So get it while the getting's good. It's hard to say how long those will last, but here's just a screenshot video that I took of the beer category. You can see all of these different pack shots. These are much different than just a straight pack shot. In addition, you can use that self-service ad platform, and this is a great thing to test in the ad platform because you can do that test. You can swap out the hero image, run an ad, and then you can find out immediately if you're seeing a lift in conversions based on that one change. So it's sort of like a hack to allow you to do A/B testing. Another tip is that Instacart actually creates their titles using an algorithm, but you can influence them. They're pulling from different fields, particularly if you have a verified CSP like Salsify. You can actually override some of that data that feeds their titles through their API. So they don't allow size information in those titles, but you can actually correct errors with and you may see errors with your titles often. So you can actually correct those by changing fields in Salsify like brand name and product name fields. You can also influence search by adding keywords to that. So if you have Instacart keyword data like we provide, or you can maybe check the ad platform for some different keywords that you've been testing, you can start to drop those in. So you can look at things like brand, category, and flavor, and you can edit that product name field in Salsify to become something more like brand flavor with a keyword in it and the category. Okay, Walmart content tips. So, in 2016, analysts predicted that click and collect would reach 6.7 billion by 2020. This was even before the pandemic. They exceeded 8.5 billion with click and collect. So, that's a massive growth, and that was all pre-COVID. So don't discount Walmart. Of course, most of you guys probably don't, but this is another example from Retail Feedback Group that Walmart has the most online grocery shoppers. So I think it's a really important thing. There's such a big behemoth in the brick and mortar space, and a lot of people in other categories besides food, of course, put Amazon right at the top of their priority list. I think for those of you in grocery, if you're not putting Walmart first, you're probably in the minority, because most of our grocery customers are putting Walmart in the top tier of their priorities in terms of retailers. And Walmart's making moves based on their growth. So of course, merging the .com and grocery platforms, that kicked off. It was surprising, especially for some of us, because the grocery app was the most downloaded app for some period of time during COVID. So eliminating that app was pretty bold, but they have been merging those platforms. And that does have some search implications that if you're ever curious about, we can talk through separately. They did launch Walmart Plus, and this is a big deal because not only does it, was it launched to compete with Prime, but it includes grocery. So big push for consumers to be able to have a way to have their groceries delivered through Walmart Plus. They announced that major restructuring. I think that was about a month or two ago with layoffs, but hoping ultimately to add more efficiency to their operations. Added omni-channel analytics to their ad platform. Big deal, especially as you're trying to allocate and understand where your sales are coming from. They inked that Shopify partnership to expand the online marketplace, launched drone delivery partnerships. And then I think this one is probably one of the more bold that I saw was they announced the same day delivery pilot with Instacart. So I'm really curious to see how that pilot shakes out. So tip one for Walmart, maximize your titles. This is a really big deal. Walmart's been changing their title character limits since they started that transition with grocery and .com to merge those platforms. So they've always been truncating their titles, but now they're proactively reaching out to brands to actually reduce their character count. So if you were one of those out there that was keyword stuffing and had really long titles, you might be impacted because you don't necessarily want those titles to get so truncated that they actually get chopped off completely. So you want to be proactive and get on top of that. Look for your particular category guides from your Walmart team and be proactive about those title changes. Okay, another tip. Walmart discourages heroes as well, formally, but they still allow them. So much more robust hero types are allowed with Walmart than about any other retailer. So you can really push the boundaries when it comes to your hero images with Walmart. And for those of you guys who've never really looked at the research around hero testing, University of Cambridge has the e-commerce inclusive design toolkit, and that's a really big deal. We see big lift, and like I mentioned before, even just a 0.5% increase in that can drive daily incremental revenue. It can drive it up to hundreds of thousands of dollars annually just for a single SKU. So really, you may want to test that with your conversion rates. And just as an example, Walmart is even playing with hero images in their private label. So if you do a search for the great value products, you'll see quite a few Cambridge style images just with their private label products.
Hey, Amanda, I hate to cut you off, but we're running out of time and it's, time to move on to the next one, but I'd love for you to just be able to give us a few closing remarks. For sure. I'm loving these tips.
Sure. So I'll skip ahead and just let you know that there's title character opportunities. There's HTML markup opportunities with Walmart. There's content tips for Amazon. The biggest thing there is for you to focus on your enhanced carousel and really leverage your A+ content for product specific content because that's prioritized above your traditional content. Mobile is really important with Amazon. So make sure you look at your image carousel. It's a really important thing for Amazon. Merchandising with your images there is really important. And then lastly, Shipped. So don't forget about Shipped. If you're missing content, you can actually work directly with retailers like Meijer and H-E-B that don't have content uploads by going directly to Shipped first. So if you deploy to Shipped, you can get to the other sites. So I guess I'll go ahead and just wrap up there. I guess I got a little wordy today.
Yeah, like I said, I hate to cut you off. You have tons of good tips, and hopefully this will be available to everyone after the conference.
I think there was a couple of questions, but we're going to encourage them to reach directly out to you, Amanda, to keep it rolling. So.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks so much, guys. No problem.
Thank you.